Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to go ahead and call to order the Watershed Committee meeting and Board of Directors meeting from the Marin Municipal Water District today, Thursday, June 15th, 2023. And if I could please get a roll call.
Yes, good afternoon. Director Cush, Director Russell, Director Smith,
Here.
Vice Chair Schmidt,
Here.
and Chair Sampson.
Here. Next, I'd like to get a motion for the adoption of today's agenda.
So moved. So moved. I'll second then.
Great. And then a roll call.
Yes. Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
And Chair Sampson.
Aye. Next, we'd like to look at see if there's any public comments for items not on today's agenda.
There are none.
Okay, great. We can go ahead and move on to item number one. And that's a motion to approve the minutes of the Watershed Committee from March 16th, 2023.
So moved. Second.
Okay, roll call.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice Chair Schmidt.
Aye.
And Chair Sampson.
Aye. Okay, next up, we have a presentation on the Watershed Recreation Management Planning Update.
Good afternoon, committee members. Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Manager. We've prepared a presentation for you all today to provide an update on the Watershed Recreation Management Planning Feasibility Study that the district has been working through. So give me 1 second. So the presentation today, we're going to provide an update on the workshops that the district has been carrying out since June of 2022. We're also going to highlight the Watershed Visitor Census Survey data that has been presented. It didn't come up.
Oh, yeah, you have to do
I'm on Zoom. All right, sorry about that. So we're going to also provide a overview of the Watershed Visitor Census Survey report that the district has developed as part of this planning process and is linked in this agenda and on our website now for the public to view. So the planning objective all along has been to evaluate current patterns of watershed visitation and collect community input on current conditions and future desired conditions. We've also been considering opportunities for continuing to support safe, inclusive access with an emphasis on protecting the watershed's unique biodiversity, habitat, and water quality. And really, this planning effort's been a discussion with the community to think about how we can update and refine our ongoing operations of the watershed to support the visitors and the community members that come. The first meeting that we had, we focused mostly on trying to frame the issues, really focusing on the types of issues folks were seeing on the watershed and those future desired conditions that they wanted us to plan towards. Some of the themes that came out of those discussions that were kind of framing this planning process related to the physical and environmental conditions of the watershed, think roads, trails, as well as the habitat conditions, the different ecology on the watershed, and then thinking about our operations and how those can improve the systems that we manage. There was recognition that there's institutional constraints, that we're a water district and not a parks district, and there's kind of subtleties there that we need to think through as we look to the future of managing the watershed. Also, environmental protection and restoration is being kind of foundation to where we're going and how we're thinking about managing the watershed. A lot of interest in understanding the patterns of use, and that kind of comes back to our visitor survey that we're going to be presenting today. And then discussion that we wanted to think about visitor management as a key process for protecting natural resources. And then acknowledging and recognizing through these discussions that there's a lot of varying goals. Visitors aren't always in alignment, and that can create tension, especially when folks don't feel like their goals can be met. And there's a long history here in Marin of competing views about how public land should be used. So we're dealing with all of those as we work through this planning process. Some of the issues that we heard during those initial meetings were kind of long-term challenges that we have in front of us relating to climate change. Some of the impacts that we do see on the landscape from the history of use going back before the district had the watershed and to current use. Also seeing the impacts that current use can have, whether that be litter, sanitation, crowding, conflicts on trails, things of that nature. Also recognizing kind of constraints around staffing and financial constraints. Also seeing a lot of opportunity for influencing respectful behavior through outreach, understanding that there could be different access and connections made throughout the watershed through new approaches to managing visitation. Recognizing that visitor goals are different and we have to think through that and work together to find collaborative solutions. And we looked a lot at what desired conditions do folks want to see through this planning process. And those came down to kind of creating net environmental benefits, conserving, restoring our resources, looking at trail connections, thinking about management zones as tools for public visitor access management, thinking about education, sustainability, and stewardship, all kind of as central components of how we work with the community when we're thinking about public access on these watershed lands. And then thinking about how we can integrate an adaptive and modern approach to really protect our watershed and our water quality. Some of the key takeaways that were brought forward in our discussions and through these workshops are really going to be kind of foundational to this feasibility study and be components that we build upon and build off of as we work through this document. So some of those that we've spent a lot of time on related to community-based stewardship, really starting to see recreation and stewardship as hand in hand and how we can provide those opportunities and how we can work with diverse community groups to expand opportunities for watershed stewardship programs through engaging our visitors as active stewards and things like trail maintenance, litter abatement, invasive plant management, and restoration. Also recognizing that the stewardship of our watershed begins with maintaining our existing facilities and amenities that we do provide and helping to protect and restore those natural resources that are there on the watershed. So really stewardship being a grounding component of this planning process. So that was a discussion during our second workshop. The second kind of area of interest that was brought forward is really kind of our sustainable, managing a sustainable network of roads and trails. And that is what our 2005 Roads and Trails Plan has helped us do, but really recognizing that there's modern trail management approaches that we might want to bring into our toolbox and think about updates to that document potentially. So really thinking about net positive environmental impacts with all of these planning approaches and ideas that came forward. Thinking potentially about modifying trails and roads to spread visitors out, address points of congestion, and reduce environmental impacts that some of the trails may be having on the watershed. And then evaluating a visitor management approach in different ways to think about that as a mechanism for helping us protect these sensitive resources on the watershed. The third area was really thinking about adaptive management and how we are using that. So thinking about roads and trails as being more responsive to changes in use and thinking about what that looks like. So recognizing that we did our last census survey of visitors in 2012, we updated it in 2022, and that could be beneficial to do on a periodic basis to kind of take the temperature of the watershed and better understand how folks are using it. Recognizing that an update to roads and trails is an important thing. And we heard from visitors and stakeholders participating in the process that a new trail classification could be considered and Project Restore efforts should be aligned with kind of visitor access planning opportunities. And then adaptive management of visitor services, those being kind of our parking signs, maps, stewardship activities, and enforcement, really recognizing that there are changes in patterns of use and we need to be adaptive to those changes. The third workshop that we had at Lake Lagunitas picnic area was really geared towards stewardship specifically, and we looked at the current programs that we offer to the community and talked about ways that we could enhance that to better serve them. So we talked about standardizing some of our messaging in relationship to trail signage and regulations that are on the watershed, thinking about programs that can better connect with underserved groups, recognizing that we can't provide all programs to everyone and kind of targeting some of those underserved community groups, expanding outreach around responsible recreation. This is kind of a statewide initiative right now, thinking about how we can influence behavior of folks. We do have a good model here locally of Slow and Say Hello. That's a tool that's being used and can be built upon, but there's more work that can be done. And then recognizing that collaboration with OneTAM is expanding our capacity and opportunities exist there for us to continue to do outreach through that mechanism. Watershed interpretation becoming something that the district focuses more on to help people understand the unique value of our watershed to the community and to the biological resources that use it as their home. And then update when we get into Project Restore or trail stewardship, there's a lot of discussion at the stewardship workshop about having our community engage more actively in trail maintenance and trail stewardship. So expanding those opportunities beyond habitat restoration, but to also include trail opportunities. And we heard from a lot of our stakeholders that they had an interest in participating in that. And then visitor outreach through other programs. We're currently working on the watershed right now with our TAM van through one TAM to do forestry outreach. And we're thinking that could be a important tool that we could build upon for recreation related activities. Moving on to the Watershed Ambassador Program, we heard a lot of our stakeholders being interested in participating in an ambassador program to be active and being out on the watershed to help the district connect with the community members that are using the watershed and think about how we can better influence the behavior that's happening out there. And then just different ways that we can connect visitors to the watershed to educate them about drinking water, biodiversity, and responsible recreation, all being kind of wrapped into an expansion of our existing Watershed Ambassador Program. At the fourth workshop, we discussed more of our facilities, and some of the key takeaways from that came back down to trail maintenance and stewardship, looking at opportunities to expand upon what the district has historically done and thinking about new ways to do that. There was a lot of interest again in the Watershed Ambassador Program being enhanced and continued. Adaptive management and modern trail planning was a discussion point that a lot of folks had different examples locally, regionally across the state that they thought could be applied here on the watershed. And there was a real interest in reviewing the trail classifications again, specifically around multi-use access. There was also deep discussion around how watershed interpretation could be integrated into our programs to better connect folks with the fact that the watershed is their drinking water source, and telling that story as well, telling the story of the habitat that exists there and why we don't have trails everywhere and the sensitive resources that we're trying to protect through this kind of coordinated access planning. One of the key elements that came forward during our planning process was a concept of zoning as a strategy for managing visitors and protecting resources. So we did a workshop of looking at the different kind of components of zoning: social, recreation, ecological, and managerial, and kind of getting input from our stakeholders about what would fit within each of those boxes. And then that's something that we're working with our consultant on to think about how that can be used either at a project specific basis, kind of like Azalea Hill, if you will. Think about how we've kind of thought about zoning in that project to protect some areas while creating multi-use access in other areas, or more broadly across the watershed. So we're working with this. It's not a new concept for the district. We currently have a zoning in our roads and trails plan through the trail classification system. We also use it in our BIFIP. That was a little more driven by vegetation and fuel conditions, but it is an example of how the districts use zoning for different planning processes, and it probably fits here in some way. And we're working with the consultant to figure out what that might look like. So at the final workshop, number 6, we wanted to check our work and the input that we had received from the community through the previous 5 workshops and the initial scoping meetings that we coordinated. And so we provided everyone an opportunity to give us feedback, and we heard people kind of reinforce the positions, perspectives, and experiences that they had on the watershed and what they wanted to be a priority in this planning effort. We also identified that some of the discussion points that we've been having through the planning effort kind of went into this near-term opportunities or takeaways, and some of them were going to take additional analysis and next steps before we could do any implementation or direction in that way. So we've kind of broken them out just as an example and reference points for people to kind of understand as we bring a feasibility study to conclusion. There's going to be some things we can do immediately, some things that'll take more planning, and we've kind of illustrated it here for everyone. Now, that was all kind of a summary of what we presented at previous watershed committee meetings and what we've talked about with our workshops and our public groups through this planning process. And now the visitor census survey, this is a document that our planning consultant, Alta, who's on the in the Zoom meeting with us today, has been working on developing and synthesizing all the data that's been collected. I'll note that we used 3 kind of distinct data sources. We used our in-person visitor surveys. We did an online survey. We collected data in the field using trail counters. We used Strava app to gather information about patterns of use. And then we also collected some publicly available data around how people were accessing it through the streetlight data set. So those were kind of our data elements that went into this report. I'll note that there is some differences between the in-person survey and the online survey. And we do understand, and we saw that the online survey was distributed beyond what we intended it to be distributed. We saw it posted on forums. We saw different stakeholder groups coaching people on how they could enter their results multiple times. So we have more confidence in the in-person surveys, and we also have the ability to compare the in-person surveys of 2022 to the in-person surveys of 2012. So the next couple of slides and the majority of the report that we've developed is comparing that 2022 to 2012, as well as bringing in that Strava data and that streetlight data and those eco counter data. So the slides that I have here, we're going to walk through, and they are the 2022 to 2012 comparison. The first one is, what are the age of our visitors? And we did see kind of a transition to some of our visitors getting older, still kind of low numbers in our younger visitors. That may have been just who was responding to the survey, who was out there on the days of the survey. But generally, I think our users are, or our visitors are in the older side of the equation. Interestingly, weekly visits where we see most people, they're reoccurring on a weekly basis. We do see daily visitors. That's pretty impressive that we have 20% of daily visitors coming back to the watershed, but the majority of folks are coming on a weekly basis. The length and type of visit, we saw folks mostly in the 1 to 2 hour visitation period. And that's an important piece of information to think about, because we do have high numbers of visitation, but we have to think about that spread across an entire day. So it's interesting and good to see that we are kind of condensing our time and our visits on the watershed. And then how do they typically arrive? We are seeing mostly vehicle driven, driving alone or carpooling, and then a lot of bicycle access and walking, which kind of signs that we have a lot of our regular visitors who are adjacent to the watershed and benefiting from that in their community. Now, one piece is we looked at how people are recreating or visiting, or what their mode is when they're on the watershed. And we did see hiking as our kind of largest group. We saw dog walking, running as other elements, and biking and e-biking and picnicking, enjoying nature and photography. There's probably a whole slew of other activities folks are doing when they're out there, but those are kind of the ones we lumped it into for this census. And this was kind of in line with what we asked in 2012 as well. Now, an important one that we got out of this survey, and I think is a good one to reflect on, is that the vast majority of our visitors feel safe. 91% of visitors responded saying, yes, they feel safe when they're on the watershed. And that's an important piece. 8% did not respond. And another piece is kind of looking at our road and trail conditions and how people are experiencing those. In 2012, we didn't have the fire road question, so we added that in 2022. We did see about 84% of folks thought it was good or great on our fire roads. Similarly, with our trail conditions, we are sitting around 87% currently, which is a slight drop from the 2012. So it demonstrates we can do a little work there to improve our trails and our roads likely. And then interaction with other visitors, this was a key one as well. We saw over 80% of respondents feeling like they were having good or great interactions with other visitors. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because this is a survey that was done on the watershed from the daily visitors or the weekly visitors or monthly visitors, and what their experience is out there is telling a story that they feel safe, trails and roads are in good conditions, and their interactions with other visitors are primarily good. It doesn't mean there's not work to be done. It just demonstrates that we are in a good space and good place, and we have trends from 2012 that kind of align with that feeling. Now, we do know in multiple ways that we had an increase in visitation after COVID or during COVID. And this Strava data is really representation of the county-wide. It's not watershed specific, but it's demonstrating what we saw across public lands, not only here in Marin, but statewide. And we saw that pre-COVID, we had lower visitation numbers. In 2022, our numbers are drastically higher. And that is something that we expect to continue to some level. It's hard to say what, but we know that people are getting out more and connecting with nature in different ways. Some of this, this is app driven. So this is from Strava. I'm sure there's some of this is that people are using that app more. That's definitely part of it, but it's also something that we saw, and we, worked on those issues in different ways during COVID. You can remember our restroom contract went up significantly as we saw more use. It also just speaks to the fact that people are, finding connection with being outdoors and recreating again. And we have a tremendous asset for the community in those terms.
Before you leave this one,
Mhm.
can you tell what time of day the events occur with Strava?
Yeah, you can. For this one, no, this is just a kind of,
Sorry, I couldn't hear that question.
it was Jed, it was about, Director Smith, it was about time of day. Can we look at that for Strava data?
Because what I understand is that there's bragging on Strava about attacking the water district at night, the watershed. And it might be interesting to see if we can figure out who that is. Nancy Praetzel has complained to me a lot about it. Apparently her bedroom window looks out at the watershed and there's some route, at least they use lights on their bikes so she can see them when they're out there. But apparently there's a fair number of people who ride at night.
So the next slide that we have for you looks at Strava for the watershed specifically. So we were able to look at this data and see how people are using it during the weekday and then also on the weekends. It's a little muted here, but in the report, you can kind of get a little more granular and see the trips taken during these periods of time on these different routes. So the most appealing on your left on during the weekday, you can see the dark blue line through the center of the watershed. That's Bolinas Fairfax Road. So that's a popular road biking route. And so you can see it's highly used often. But this is good data for the district to have as we start to think about how we manage visitor access on the watershed. And so this is a new tool that we did not have in 2012 and is really informative for us to think about planning and managing that.
Are the purple lines trails?
Yeah, so all the roads, they're either fire roads or trails or, paved county roads that are showing up on this map. And we can see where people are coming to the watershed from via that and also how they're using it. And then where they become purple, it's kind of an overlap of that's where we have both, biking and hiking happening.
In agreement, I mean, by permission or without permission?
So that's where we can get a little more granular when we dive into this and look at it. At this level, it's a little hard to see that.
Sure.
So we also put eco counters, which are trail counters out on the watershed. Those counters can either count hikers or we had multi-use ones. So you'll see differences when it's just a flat blue color, that was just a hiking trail counter. And when it has the two colors, those were able to distinguish between cycling and hiking. So we took kind of our popular entrance points, and this was able to give us information and data to help us determine kind of annual visitation. So we use this in the Strava data, and we were able to come up with some estimates on what we're seeing as far as annual visitation. It also gave us an understanding of kind of loading at various trailheads. We do know that we're still refining this to some extent because we do know that Cataract Trail came up a little bit low, and that might be a seasonality component, or it might be that this was a trail counter that was capturing groups of people as one person because they can't always distinguish between that. So there are limitations to these things, and we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at them. So the eco counter, trail counter, as well as the Strava data and streetlight data helped us determine some kind of annual estimates for use. And we compared this to the estimates that were developed in 2012. And you can see that we're seeing probably somewhere between the low and the mid range of 9% and 27% increase in visitation. So that's just kind of an interesting point to understand kind of how much more visitation are we getting on an annual basis. And these are impressive numbers in terms of total numbers of people, but we also have to remember that the vast majority of these people, going back to that, are you visiting weekly, monthly? These are repeat visitors, right? So it's not that we're seeing 2 million new people every year to this space, that we're seeing a lot of people coming back to enjoy the things that they love on the watershed. So as far as next steps go, we've concluded our community workshops. We had 6 of them with 2 site visits. We had a scoping meeting ahead of those workshops. We've been informed by the e-bike community advisory committee as well that was happening in 2019. And now the district is going to develop a feasibility study out of this data that we've collected. We've published the visitor census survey that's available on the website. We'll be using that along with everything on the left-hand side of this slide to inform kind of the development of that feasibility study. All of the input that we've received from the community workshops will feed into that, and we'll start to summarize and organize that in a way that provides us with some opportunities to evaluate as far as next steps go And as when we go back to that kind of key takeaway slide, there's going to be some things that we can do in the near term and other things that will take a little bit longer time or more planning in order to do. So that's the conclusion of this particular slide. Our timeline here is that we'll have a draft in the fall of 2023 and hopefully conclude this process in the winter of 2023. So as I mentioned, we have Alta Planning and Design on Zoom with us. And if you have any questions, we're happy to answer those.
Great. Sean, thank you very much for your first of a few presentations today. Board comments on the presentation.
Thank you, Sean. It's really such an endeavor. I mean, it really, and we stop and take note of the fact we're talking about 2.5 million visits and recognizing a year, and then recognizing how many of those people are people who are from our community and who use it on a regular basis. It really highlights the importance of it as a local community resource. So it's great data. It's really exciting to see. I want to ask some questions about how an endeavor like this is only as good as we are able to reach out to not only the people who are easy to contact, but we're asking ourselves also, there are parts of our community that don't visit the watershed maybe as often as those who live right next to Phoenix Lake, for example, where there's such a high visitorship. I mean, 1,000 daily visitors at Phoenix Lake. I mean, that's a huge number. That kind of, as somebody who goes there often, I'm never surprised if you go late, you can never get a parking spot, but recognizing that kind of usership. But I wonder if you could speak to the communities that you've had to really spend some time reaching out to try to engage in this planning process, so that if we don't have people visiting from our low user groups, our low income communities that we want to make our watershed accessible to, like, how are we reaching out to those communities to get input from them to see what it is that we can do to make it an experience that is valuable for them as well? I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so during the initial scoping phase, we came up with a list of somewhere around 70 organizations throughout Marin County that we sent invites to participate in that scoping meeting. We had various groups come and speak to us throughout the planning process about how to engage various groups beyond kind of regular visitors. And it's an area that we're going to have to continue to work in, right? We're probably not getting all the input that we need in order to make kind of decisions on how to connect better with various parts of our community. I think what we also need to appreciate through this process is that some of our programs probably need to become targeted towards those communities rather than just kind of serving broadly Marin County. And so I think the answer is that we've got more work to do and to continue to do in that way.
Thank you for that. And your last point there is that more that we can do to service those communities. Do you have, is that going to be something that will be explored in the draft recreation plan, or do you have some thoughts about where that's going?
Yeah, so right now, specifically within the one-TAM sphere, that's where we're starting to target different communities like the Canal District and Marin City for the programs that are being offered through the one-TAM collaboration for education and community science and volunteer opportunities and school events specifically. So it's probably an area that we can build upon in this feasibility study to think about how we are part of one-TAM and continuing to support those programs, and we are the sites that those programs come to have those experiences. And so continuing to build on that will probably be a focus of this feasibility study.
Okay, great. Just one other point. I really recognize and feel strongly about the way in which our watershed can support our schools, because really when it comes down to the greatest nature classroom that we've got, it is our watershed, and how it can serve all the schools that are around us. And so I know that a lot of I feel like sometimes the recreation management plan is been about solving problems, which it needs to do, the challenges that we have with growing usership and different uses and the conflicts that come there. But I also I want to make sure that we're also asking ourselves, what could we be? Recognizing, we have a primary focus of protecting our watershed for our water quality and for water supply, but also seeing this as as a community resource, and particularly engagement with our schools. What could we do to make it easier for our schools to use our watershed and make it more of an exchange of engagement in our classrooms, but also our classrooms coming to our watershed? and wondering if you have any thoughts about that or how that might be addressed in the recreation plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind is we have a lot of programs currently, and we tried not to be redundant in a recreation planning process to say, what are we already doing and what do we want to replace in those things? It's more about what are we enhancing and improving. So Trout in the Classroom is a way that community members in Marin and schools in Marin all have an opportunity to come up to the watershed and participate in that program. That's an incredible effort that we see thousands of students each year come into our watershed. We have volunteer events where we connect with schools and continue. Those habitat restoration opportunities are available, and we do work with school groups for those, and we'll continue to do that. And that'll be a component of our recreation planning process and the feasibility study. But it is a continuation of something we're already doing. So in some ways, it's just reinforcing the programs we have in place and continuing to support those.
Were there any thoughts or questions from our schools and from our either individual schools or from our school boards about, and did we ask them about what could we do into the future that would make us a better resource for our schools?
We didn't engage directly with the schools. We have an ongoing relationship with most of the schools. And so if they have those concepts, we probably heard them if we have not heard them, and we can happily think about that a little deeper when we develop the final feasibility study about how we connect. We also have, permits that we issue to school groups to come to the watershed, and we work with them through that process. And we can look at ways that we can kind of reduce that as being any sort of barrier that it might be for them.
Okay. I mean, I want to acknowledge we do a ton of things. And so
Yeah.
I don't want to make it sound like we're not doing enough, but I'm just curious, and as we go into this planning process of where we hope to go into the future, and it won't happen overnight, but knowing getting input from the schools of just like, if we can, or not that we can do it, just anything, but what are things that we could do from the school's perspective to make it a more accessible experience. And, I'll just say a last point, which is, I think when I look at the number of visitors that we do have to our watershed, and Matt and I have had conversations about this around the opportunity for us to have a more robust visitor center program that really could host schools and other visitors. I mean, given the number of people who come to our watershed and the world-class and of almost global importance in terms of biodiversity of our watershed, it seems like that there's more that we could do to enhance visitor experience, especially the short duration ones that we saw are very common, 1 to 2 hours. Having a visitor center might be a way of helping to connect those people, inform those people. It might also take some pressure off of some of our trails where people really just want to go and learn, and maybe that would, be another way to do that. So that's a concept that I think we've talked about and would be great to see if we could explore as well as part of this process.
Yeah.
I thought that decision was already made. Didn't we decide to use the log cabin for that?
The log cabin's not being used.
No, I know it's not being used now, but I thought that was where it was headed.
There was a look at restoring that site. It was very expensive because it's a historic site. It's very small.
But we already did part of it, right?
We did a part. No, we
Except for
haven't.
the beetles or something.
We've done some minor restorative, but it would take a large project to make that usable by the public.
But there was a discussion about a project at that location.
There was
as I
a
recall.
feasibility study to look at restoring it. Yeah.
But I meant know about the visitor center.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, maybe it was before my time. but-
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
talked about it at one point, but I don't think it was.
Sorry, I can't hear that comment.
Oh, Don said, yes, Don Wick mentioned that it had been evaluated for being a visitor center at one point.
How many annual passes do we sell?
I don't know that off the top of my head. We can
Rough
get that
guess?
number to you. We'd have to look into it, but that is an area that we're thinking about our parking fees and
Yeah.
our annual passes, like what those should be set at. And if those should be reviewed through this process, will be kind of one of those discussion points.
Let's not go back to the mechanical device. Don remembers. I mean, it's, 2.5 million, if that's the number, or 2 million, or whatever the number is. It offers a big potential to self-fund. I mean, if everybody just paid $10 a year,
Mhm.
you'd be at 25 million, which is a quarter of our budget. You know, it's a big number. And I'm not proposing we do that. I'm not proposing how we would do that. But it seems to me that I think from a user standpoint, we should think about pushing hard on selling those passes. I don't know what necessarily the extra benefit would be, but I imagine we could imagine an extra benefit.
No. It's an interesting topic, and not to get too far off, because I'd like to see other comments from Director Smith as well, but it's interesting timing that the County of Marin just voted to do away with their park fees to include or to reduce barriers to entry for those who normally can't do it. I think it's a really positive step forward. But Jed, comments?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, and I particularly appreciate your increasing focus on data and analytics. It starts with measuring impact, and then we can start to figure out what to do about it. So Sean, everything that I'm hearing, I'd love to get to know you more. I've met you once in person and obviously seen you in meetings, but everything I'm hearing is a lot of support internally and externally for what you're doing. So keep it up. I have 3 comments. One is that, and I'll be brief. There was a lot of discussion about volunteering. I think our community wants to help and we want to step up. And I've heard pushback from the staff that it takes more work to organize volunteers than it's worth. And one area of our budget that I would like us to consider is to invest in our community engagement and volunteering effort. I heard it from the horseback riders, the mountain bikers who have maintained tremendous trail maintenance at Tamarancho, and others who are willing and ready and actually quite skilled, possibly have certificates that we can engage with people so that we can train them, increase our budget for volunteers, and help Suzanne to get more support. I think we have hundreds of people literally willing and wanting to help, and I would encourage us to think about how we can do that better. The second is that I've heard repeatedly, and I've tried to say, and I don't know how costly this is, maybe just more work that you guys see it as, but I hear pretty repeated comments about our signage being negative, the things that you cannot do. You can't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And so I think that we could have an effort to turn around our signage to be as much about positivity as it would be about, being safe and secure. And this would probably be a sign by sign approach, but also kind of a holistic view of how we're branding ourselves in the watershed. And then my last point is the interconnectedness of our use of the land by our community, and your presentation that's coming up around fisheries and the habitat. And sometimes I feel like we separate them, that people feel like one is in conflict with another, and sometimes that's true. But I'd encourage you, Sean, to start to think about how recreation is or is not harmful to the habitat, and where we want to be extra careful and make sure we're not hurting our spouted owls and coho salmon habitat, and where we want to be extra sure that we're protecting our watershed and our water sources. But there are other areas that probably are not as harmful, and there are other uses that may not be as harmful. So connecting them would, I think, help give people a real true sense that it's not just black and white. It's not like no bikes. It can be like maybe no bikes here or there. And I know you've done some of that work, but just even the notion of having these 2 presentations somewhat separate, start to weave them together as you get that recreation / watershed and habitat plan together in the fall. I think that would be helpful. So, I mean, you can respond if you want to, but no need.
Okay, thanks, Jed. Larry, any other additional comments? Okay. Sean, thank you very much for this presentation. I know this is quite additional workload and with everything else going on in the watershed. So thank you to you and the staff for doing it. And it might seem like an ancillary duty for what we have, but responsible management of our watershed, including recreational access, is a big component of making sure that 75% of our watershed, or where our water comes from, is responsibly managed. So thank you for doing that. Look forward to the results coming out in the fall moving forward. And thank you very much for the data And it's also really good to hear that a majority of the users feel safe, which I think lends credence to what's really going on in the watershed. So it's good to see that most of the people do feel like they're having a very safe experience, which is incredibly important for everyone using it, regardless of how you're using it. So thank you very much for that. And with Terry, with that, I'd like to go ahead and open it up for public comment.
Yes, good afternoon. I'd like to remind the public that there are, you have up to 3 minutes. Thank you. And we have about 7 or 8 speakers right now. So the first 3 I'd like to call up are Bill Abright, Roberto Hernandez, and Nona Dennis. So Mr. Abright, please.
Hi there. My name is Bill Abright, but pretty close. I've lived in San Anselmo for 52 years, and I'm a hiker and a mountain biker and a birder and a conservator of nature. Mountain biking has kept me fit and in regular contact with my dearest friends for over 39 years. I ride 3 days a week and to the top of Mount Tam religiously every Sunday. We celebrated our 30th annual New Year's ride to the East Peak this January 1st, and I know every twist and turn of every fire road on Mount Tam. I'm part of a group we call the Over the Hill Gang. Our youngest members are in their mid-50s. Our oldest is 84. This group is the center of my universe. E-bikes have been a part of our group now for about 16 years. Since then, our number of e-bike riders has grown to 10 in 25. Most of us started riding e-bikes at about 65 years old. Riding with the regularity that I do, I have a good perspective on e-bike users. We are the same people who have gotten older, used to ride mountain bikes, and still want access to the watershed, and that is integral to our lives. The ADA rules allow for disabled users, but we would not have to wait until we are disabled to become legal users. We are good stewards of the environment and respect all users. We go slow and say hello and have participated in that program. We model good behavior and encourage our fellow riders to do so as well. Mount Tamalpais is the birthplace of mountain biking. There are many well-behaved bike riders who depend on access to the watershed for their health and well-being. Like myself, I expect they will convert to e-bikes and continue to ride into their senior years and still feel like a kid on a bike. I urge the board to consider that e-bikes are indeed just bicycles and allow them to legally access roads and trails where other bicycles are allowed. Thank you.
Thank you. Roberto Hernandez and then Nona Dennis, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Roberto Hernandez. I'm on the board for Access for Bikes. Our organization represents over 3,500 mountain bikers in Marin County, many of whom use our beloved MMWD watershed lands. For the past RMP meetings, we have had the largest number of commenters according to our count, and we have received feedback from your staff that we indeed are being heard. With that in mind, we put out a call to our membership today for speakers to testify at this public meeting, and we had over 60 volunteers to attend and give public comment. Don't worry, we didn't bring them all today. I want to be respectful of your time, so I'll be the only one speaking today. Today, we want to leave you with our 3 key messages as we proceed with this important work on the RMP. First, it is absolutely essential and necessary for you to complete what you have started and produce a recreational management plan that meets the needs of all users. Secondly, you've already know our position, but to be clear, the mountain bike community is not represented in your lands. For our constituency, it is a successful outcome will be achieved when mountain bikers have geographically equitable access to single track trails in the MMWD watershed. We believe there are systems and non-system trails today that could be open to mountain bikes, and when you are ready, we will be there to work with you towards a successful outcome. At last, we don't stand here with our head in our hand. We want to offer our services. We stand ready to develop a new partnership with Marine Water towards stewarding and maintaining trails throughout the watershed. We'd like to propose an MOU be developed between MMWD and Access for Bikes, whereby we receive proper training and commit to maintaining trails across the watershed for the myriad of user groups that use the trails. And we want to emphasize that we are ready to do this now and commit to stewarding these precious lands and trails prior to the RMP being completed. Thank you for your time and commitment to protecting our vital water resources, watershed, and recreational lands for humans and non-humans alike.
Thank you. Miss Nona Dennis, then Tom Boss and Linda Navi.
Yeah, I want to turn the focus for just a moment on the plan because we're talking about something that is still in our minds pretty abstract. We don't know what that plan is going to actually say because during the entire public process, not a single specific trail or road has been really cited. I'd like you to turn for just a moment, Sean, if you would, to one slide which shows takeaways, and it has two really important categories, one of which is what you can do now, and the other is what you might like to do but can't do yet because you don't know the feasibility of doing these things. And could you go to that slide for just a moment? Our interpretation
Thanks, Sean.
is, can we take time out of my time for just a moment while we get this slide, because it's an important exhibit, really important exhibit.
I paused it.
Takeaways. Okay, all right. This is a really critical thing because if you look carefully at the examples on the left-hand side, the ambassador program, pilot studies, some biological, some assessments, signage, maps, stewardship program, community sciences, none of these require a CEQA clearance of any sort. The ones on the right, you will not see in the plan unless they are in terms of feasibility, such as the reclassification of roads and trails, the update of the 2005 plan, the CEQA analysis for that plan. Even policy updates have physical ramifications. Multi-use trail connections have physical ramifications. All of those on the left, on the right-hand side, have physical ramifications. Even the policies can change how the watershed is used in enough ways as to trigger a CEQA. I'm not asking at this point for an EIR, but I am saying that there is a CEQA screen between those two. So what we expect to see, we've kind of taken this approach. We're imagining what this plan is going to contain. It's not going to satisfy some of the requests that you're hearing now because you don't know the feasibility yet of doing these things, and you won't until you do some form of CEQA analysis. Before you make decisions for a new connector trail, for example, for any new physical groundbreaking that is part of this plan will require that you do something to the 2005 plan, which does not talk about people at all. It only implies that there are people out there. It talks about the impacts and so forth of recreation, but it doesn't say who's doing it or how they're doing it or when they're doing it. So you have a huge amount of work to do to come up, bring that 2005 plan, which has a great beginning. The Project Restore has been worked on for months and months, many years. I'm sorry, years, 10 years since 2005. Oh, that's been longer than 10 years. So I just want to inject a note of reality here about what you can, first of all, afford to do, how you're going to deal with that 2005 plan, which is a great beginning now, but it's almost 20 years old. So I just want you to feel, I don't see among you that you sense this reality.
And no, I'm gonna have to
You go, okay,
wind down the time here,
I'm
but-
sorry, we'll stop it.
Okay, great,
Okay,
thank you.
just think about it.
Thank you. Mr. Tom Boss, then Linda Navi, and then T. Calloway. So Mr. Boss, I got it.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Boss of the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. Wanted to give a kudos to directors Sampson and Cush for their Marin voice that really sets, I think, a good tone for the next steps moving forward on this watershed plan. Visitor survey, great news in my opinion. I focused on the on what people felt, not the numbers of who's doing what, and that's good to know too. But really, 91% of the people surveyed felt safe and had good interactions with other users. Only 1% said they felt unsafe on our watershed, and to me, that says our work is a lot easier than we might think. There's people are really having a good time. They're very supportive, and I think we can get this plan to the finish line in a collaborative way. The spike in visitation, I see that as a benefit in that it has potential for more volunteers, people to come out and care for the watershed, more funding to support not only trail projects, but habitat restoration and other things. And as a father of an 8-year-old, if I can get my kid outside and away from the screens, that is a win. So, and last but not least, a cognitive, your cognitive and critical thinking is actually enhanced when you're outdoors. I do some of my best thinking when I'm out on a hike or on a bike ride. We don't need to look beyond Marin County to figure out how to thread the needle here. Every other land manager around the watershed, national parks, state parks, our open space preserves, they've all figured it out. They all have figured out how to provide opportunities for bike experiences on trails and done it in a way that's benefited the environment and has addressed conflict. By giving bikes a place to go, you reduce the conflicts where they're not supposed to be. So we can look to the other agencies for assistance there. The bike community is an untapped resource. That's not a pun. We are ready, as we've been saying, to come out and do all kinds of work, whether it's being an ambassador, doing monitoring, doing trail work, habitat restoration. We've been doing this already on the watershed, but we could do it a lot more, which leads me to supporting this next item, the ranger in training, where at least one of those staffers will be able to help expand the capacity to do volunteer days out on the watershed. And I look forward to the return of a standing volunteer day, at least once a month, where people can just come out and fix those trails, fix the fences, and do good work. So with that, I look forward to the draft and the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you. After Linda Navi is Terrell Calloway, then Larry Minikes. Okay.
Hello, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today and speak. My name is Linda Novi. I'm Vice President of Marin Conservation League. Thank you, Sean, for taking on this endeavor. As was mentioned, it is big. And I just want to refer to MCL's letter to the board dated May 3rd, as well as our letter May 23rd, which we jointly signed with a number of other organizations and individuals. From the report today, Marin Conservation League continues to have some concerns that the emphasis of the water district is still maybe too much on meeting the needs of all visitors versus meeting the needs of the watershed's wildlife, plants, and the rest of the resources. And I do appreciate Director Smith's comment of looking for that nexus between recreation and its impacts. And I really appreciate you saying that. We do strongly encourage the closure of the steadily increasing miles of social non-system trails and encourage the district's planning to avoid any new roads and trails in the interior of the watershed to protect its environmental integrity. An updated inventory of social trails should be done, and I have a feeling that's on the books. But please do look at where MMWD's trails cross boundaries with other jurisdictions to look for any impacts that can be occurring on those other jurisdictions, such as MMWD, where it intersects, an illegal social trail intersects with Marin County Parks in Cascade Canyon, and that creates a lot of downstream trail problems for hikers. Other water districts can be looked at for how they are handling things, not just our surrounding partners, and that is East Bay Mud and San Francisco's Public Utility Commission's Crystal Springs Watershed. They have a careful approach. They keep most of their trails to the perimeters. They offer docent-led walks in their legacy habitat areas. And we're happy to share the recording from the MCL's Parks and Open Space Committee meeting with you if you would like to hear that. They also have people sign in, they permit on site. They have sign-ins at trailheads so that they can track more closely who's on the watershed. We want to emphasize the need for enforcement of regulations. And Sean, I noticed in your report that you talk about appropriate regulations are going to occur, maybe different signage, different things. That's great, but we do need to ensure they are followed. And I'm so delighted, and so is MCL, that Don's going to have some more support. It's nowhere near the original years ago 13 rangers. We're way down from that, but we understand your budget restrictions. Eliminating anonymity would be one giant step towards compliance. Anonymity often leads to irresponsibility. And so I think we need to really focus on that. Got it. And I want to thank Director Russell for his comment about night riding. Can I add one more point since I'm speaking for an organization? Thank you. Additionally, MCL recommends improvements and more cohesion in the reporting of citations and citizen observations. This was spelled out in our March 23rd letter that was co-signed with other groups. And maybe just a thought in your data that you are analyzing, you look at citations given and citizen observation reports, because I think that's also very, very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Calloway and then Larry Minnekes.
Hi, I'm Terrell Calloway, Executive Director for Marin County Bicycle Coalition. Thank you so much for inviting the community into this process. From what I hear, it's been a very collaborative process, and we're really excited to see what will come out of it. We are very hopeful that a plan will come about that really is based on safety, equity, and sustainability. As many of you know, Mount Tam is the birthplace of mountain biking. We also say it's a birthplace of making mountain biking illegal. And, you know, we think there are ways that we can minimize and create win-wins for everybody to use the watershed and also protect water and the environment as well. So I'm going to be short, but thank you so much for inviting us into this process.
Thank you. After Larry Minnekes is Roger Roberts, then Barbara Salzman.
Good afternoon, Larry Minnekes, and thank you for the presentation this afternoon. And I think it's important to remember that recreation is not a right, it's a privilege. And when we hear about the needs of recreationalists, those aren't needs, those are desires, desired conditions. And I think that's important to keep that in context as we go forward. And the other short comment I'd like to make is on signage, that I would suggest a master planning process for signage so that we get it right. There is tremendously wonderful signage out there in national parks, state parks, and other regional parks that I think we can learn from, and that we could really come together with a very good educational program for people. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roger Roberts, then Barbara Salzman, please.
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Sean, I have a question which you may have the answer to, but maybe not. Do we know how many of our visitors come from outside the county? And do we have the same behavior characteristics for the visitors from out of the county to those that live in the county? I suspect that people who come in from outside the county are not as aware of the sensitivity of our habitat as we are in the county itself, amongst all the various users of the watershed. So if you don't have that data, I think it would be important to understand that data, because if, for instance, 25 or 30% of the 2 million visitors are coming from out of the county, what does that mean for us in the future? And is that really an issue of variance in use? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Miss Barbara Salzman, and then Matthew Morado.
Hi, I'm Barbara Salzman, and I'm representing the Marin Audubon Society. And our position is now more than ever, the district must focus on protecting the watershed first. You've heard a long list of impacts on the district watershed, increase in conflicting demands by different users, and conflicts between the users, a significant increase in visitor use, 70 miles of illegal trails that I don't think anything much is being done on. There's increased erosion, and there's invasive species that I think you're not doing much about. The staff report and the discussion today has pretty much been about visitors, visitor interest, visitor safety, facilitating access, quality of visitor experience. That's fine. Let's hear more about the watershed. Where's the description of the unique assemblage of plants and animals that depend on the watershed and that we depend on for clean water? There's an occasional mention of biodiversity, but there really has never been presented a description of the resources. We were promised it during the workshops and it never came. We don't have any explanation or analysis of the impacts of recreation on the natural resources. That's needed. So the first task of determining what is feasible must be, in our opinion, to identify the constraints. What needs to be protected? They're all constraints should be constraints to the use of the watershed. What's the current condition? The second must be to identify and analyze the impacts of the existing recreational uses on the natural resources of the watershed. That's not been done. There were impacts mentioned in the the BIFIF, but they were never connected to recreation. And of course, they are connected to recreation. And from that, you can determine what's feasible and desirable, identify alternatives, and what's safe, not only for people, but for the watershed and its resources. To do otherwise would not be responsible. And I would like to follow up on what Linda Novi said, that point out that many of the other districts, at least the two major ones in the Bay Area, have very restricted use of the watershed. What I'm hearing sounds like this is an open space district or a parks district where the public is granted free reign. I'd like to say one other thing in the last few sentences. This is personal. My husband, we hear a lot about the need for older people to use bikes and whatever. My husband is 80 years old. He is on that watershed every week with at least 10 different friends of his. He walks all the time. You don't need to enjoy the watershed. You don't need a bike to enjoy the watershed. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Matthew Morado, and then Nathan Cohen, please.
Hello, everyone. I am Matthew Morodo, and I attend Redwood High School. Although my primary way of visiting the watershed is on bike, I find that regardless of how we experience the watershed, we are all looking for the same sustainable, healthy outdoor recreational opportunities. There's another commonality in that no matter how we enjoy the watershed, none of us think that the current recreational system is perfect. And yet there's this continued effort to keep things the same on the watershed, whether that's not allowing bikes, continuing historically unsuccessful enforcement efforts, continuing to focus on just a few users as opposed to the broader group. And while this approach has been tried and tested for the past decades, it's not succeeded, especially now when we talk about how important it is that the watershed can educate the next generation and invest people in sustainability and environmental awareness. It's paramount that we provide as many opportunities as possible for recreationalists to experience the watershed. With the current system that we have, we're excluding an enormous group of people from having those opportunities to care about it and to really understand the environmental challenges that we face, I certainly wouldn't be as aware of the drought that we have, or at least had, and care about conserving water or removing invasive species if it weren't for the hours that I'm able to spend on the watershed every week on bike. And I don't care how it is that you do it, but I think that we should all be aware that every single type of recreation, every mode of recreation has enormous benefits for the watershed, and that it raises awareness and connects people with it. With that, I'd like to thank you all.
Thank you. Mr. Nathan Cohen, please.
Hi, my name is Nathan Cohen. Thank you for holding this meeting and for all your time. I live in Centerville. I'm a mountain biker and a hiker and love being outside. Certainly in the last several years, I've grown in my appreciation of the flora and fauna that are, wild lands. I just want to kind of reiterate some stuff that other people have spoken about the need for a mountain bike trail designation. These things can be done without necessarily hurting the environment. Most likely there can be environmental benefits to these kinds of projects. And I would just like to emphasize working towards having pilot projects so that we can use data to test and see how things go, see how things work, look at the impacts, look at the benefits, look at the issues. And then I want to just communicate some caution about the what I hear as vigilantism, which has been discussed as community reports. There's a lot of bias from certain people who have backyard access to the parks, and they want to keep it that way. And so just being careful to make sure that you hear all voices of all users and the ecology of the watershed to make your decisions and planning in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jonathan Freeman.
Hi, this is Jonathan Freeman. I served with Bill Abright and Nona Dennis on the advisory committee in late 2019 about e-bikes on Mount Tam, and we came out 6-4 in favor of. I just sent an email to you earlier, and I'm a pedal assist bicyclist, and I think that such recreational velocipedes ought to immediately be legally allowed on Mount Tam right away. Right now, people can claim an ADA exemption and ride off into the 20,000 acres where the water board installs only 7 rangers. Enforcement is essentially non-existent. I've seen no rangers the last 3 times in the last 2 weeks that I was on my e-bike up on the hills. It's sort of like riding in the carpool lane with only one, quote, person in the car. In 30 years of satisfying illegal activity, I've only been caught once, and I had to work to get caught at that time. So because 7 rangers can't do all the enforcing, us enforcers are the peeps who hike and bike and horse around. But I offer such exhortation about being on the Mount Tam with extreme caution, because being on the watershed is very lonely. It makes an extremely dangerous experience. Even on weekends, once you get away from the fire road going up Phoenix Lake, you might as well be all alone. There's so few people that one meets, whether hiking, biking, or horsing. I think I'm more likely to get eaten by Yogi the Bear. That solitary experience means that one can fall down a steep ravine, never be found again. A horse can throw you. You can hit a rock and topple off your bike or trip on a tree root and soar to your death. Or in my case, I could run into my dear friend Larry Minikes, who deathly opposes e-bikes, and grappling together on this most exciting issue, toppled together off Eldridge Grade. It would be devastating to the water board to be hit with multiple lawsuits. And so the Jonathan Swift solution is to close down the entire watershed to everyone forever. But life is risky. We must enjoy ourselves as much as possible when we place ourselves in peril. The water board needs to recognize that e-bikes are indeed just bicycles and immediately allow them to legally access roads and trails where other, forget trails. I'm not going to do single trails. They're too scary. But fire roads, bicycles ought to be allowed when people are riding on them, that is. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further speakers.
Great. Moving on to our next item, item number 3, recruitment and hiring of 2 Watershed Protection Park Ranger trainees for a limited duration of up to 3 years.
Afternoon, committee members. We're going to invite Don Wick up to present this item with myself. So this item is for an approval item or review and refer to a future board meeting to recruit 2 ranger trainee positions. And the key piece to understand about these 2 positions, one is being proposed in the FY24 budget. The other one is being proposed as being created through the conversion of 3 watershed aid positions that the Ranger Department currently budgets for. And the benefit of that we'll talk through as we talk about the Ranger Trainee Program. But we think that 2 trainees to support the Ranger Department would be a great added capacity and benefit to the district. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Don Wick, who's going to talk us through the program that we've thought through.
Good afternoon. I'm Don Wick, Chief Ranger for the Water District. So Rangers have always thought of a succession plan and a way to get onboarding a little bit easier for us. The Ranger aid position has been a great help to us, but it's only 6 months. And by the time the person learns the job, they're gone. And so we came up with the Ranger trainee position for a number of reasons. One is recently advertised for a Ranger position, and we only had a small pool of people apply to it. So the Ranger trainee position, there's less requirements for someone to meet the requirements for that position, which we hope will expand the pool, provide us more diversity in the pool of applicants that we have, and give us an opportunity to introduce probably some people who've never had an opportunity to actually look at the Ranger position to that Ranger position through the trainee position. Gives us extra body or 2, not only for the Rangers, but also for maintenance staff and things that we are handling in conjunction with them. And also during this meeting, someone brought up the volunteer programs that would give us some bodies to actually work with the volunteer programs and get those hopefully up and running, as well as being ambassadors to the watershed. Having someone here for a longer period of times, they can learn the watershed, they can learn the visitors, they can learn what the water district is about. 6-month programs is way too short for us, quite frankly. So I think it's a great opportunity for the water district. It's a great opportunity for the Rangers, and I'm hoping that you guys will agree to go with it.
So I'll just note, as it truly is a trainee program. So the intention here is that we would lower the bar for entry into the Ranger position, and that the person would fulfill their wildland firefighting 2 within the first year. Then they would be also going through EMT training while being a district employee. And then if we were to have a Ranger 1 or 2 position open up, and this person was successful in that going after that position, the district would then support them to go through the post academy, which is a requirement. And those 3 certifications are what makes the bar to become a Ranger quite high and is kind of limiting our applicant pool today. And so this is truly an example of a program that we're trying to develop to reach kind of deeper into the community, to non-traditional candidates, to bring them into a Ranger career pathway and then train them up for an opportunity into the future.
Great. Thank you. Board member comments. Larry?
Yeah, you answered my question. That's what stumbling block was with respect to the applicants.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Does that mean a trainee a trainee can't work alone?
They would work under supervision primarily. It depends on what duties they're performing. If they're working with a volunteer group, there's no reason why they couldn't work alone and oversee that. But primarily, we want to train them, we want to be with them, and we want to supervise what they're doing.
And how will they be dressed?
What we did with the Ranger aide, we put them in a slightly different uniform so that there was a distinction. I would do the same thing with the trainee.
Cool.
Thanks. Jed?
I'm very supportive of this expansion to our program and our support for the watershed. So no more comments. Thanks for pushing this forward.
Great. Monty?
Same. I think this is a great way to create a transition program, address a hiring issue that we're running into in terms of finding qualified applicants. So I'm supportive.
All right, a lot of support so far. I'd like to just point out too, thank you for looking at the efficiencies in your division and how we can do things a little bit better for not much more money. So that's applaud for that. And also address something I think public safety's facing region-wide is how do you get more applicants when we've seen the lowest numbers ever? So removing these barriers is a big deal. But it's also a balance, and it's a fine line of how low do you bring the bar. And I think this strikes that balance quite well too. And especially when it opens it up to an applicant pool that traditionally has not been seen for us, which is a really big deal. I think just the hiring in general is tough. And so looking at other ways that we can make the job more attractive, but at the same time meet I guess a standard that's provided throughout the region, and something that pops up right away is the housing element for that. So I guess my first question would be, with the additional body, are we still able to provide this, or for both of these positions, would we still be able to provide the same type of housing we do for our rangers on the watershed?
Yeah, it's a great question. We currently have 2 vacant residents. They're not able to be lived in at the moment, so they would have to be upgraded. They're fairly small units, so there is an interest to see how we can improve that for these candidates and other, seasonal watershed aides on the watershed, seasonal staff on the watershed. So housing is an important component. Lake Lagunitas House provides an interesting opportunity. Alpine's a little more remote and more difficult to think about in those terms, but that would be something that we'd need to invest some resources in to get to a state that we could house them.
Right. Well, that's good that we have some options and some potential. I think it would be good to take a look at that and figure out what the next steps would be in terms of cost or a plan, because to continue that, I think we'll continue to strengthen the program. And my guess is majority of the ranger candidates now are coming from pretty far away, and to work the different hours is a big deal, especially when you're making that additional commute all the way to Sky Oak. So keeping that going. And it parlays a little bit into your next presentation. I don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse, but we're looking at introducing a bigger workload for our folks, and also now with the work shortage of everywhere in terms of finding good folks to work. So we're at this really interesting intersection of needing to get stuff done and needing people to do it. And if we can make those pieces of that puzzle more attractive and look to expand the housing potential for crews that we would potentially bring in as well, instead of having folks come from 50, 60, 100 miles away to sleep out in the watershed, and actually provide them with some little bit better working conditions, would be something that I'd like to see us moving forward with too. But I support that. And I think at that point, we open up to public comment.
There are none. Yes. Larry Minikes, please.
Sorry about that, Terry. I think what could be added to all of this is a planning document. Where are we going to be in 2030 with rangers? Who's going to retire between now and then? And how are we going to go forward? Because what's missing here is we're doing a piecemeal. We're going to bring in 2 ranger trainees, but with no real end goal here. We don't know where we're going with this. And that's what I think is important in this process is are we going to increase our rangers in the next 5 to 7 years? Are we going to keep it even? These are the questions that we're really asking at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further commenters.
Larry?
Yeah, I have a question, Don. How's it working with the sheriffs?
They're a great asset to us. I can tell you that. We're down to 1 where we used to have 2. So we put them on kind of the busier side of the week.
And because of them or us, the one versus 2?
They cut our, it's because of us.
Us,
Our
okay.
budget was cut, and so we dropped our ranger.
Okay.
Right now, they're essential to us, quite frankly. I'm working through some issues with a comm center. These are law enforcement issues I'm working through that the Rangers. We used to be able to do some things that we can't do now, and I need a deputy up there to fill that gap.
Yeah, one of the things for you guys to keep in mind is that having the sheriffs there gives us instantaneous access to the county. Like if we need a helicopter comes. It isn't they won't come for us, but they come a whole lot faster for their own folks. So they bring a lot of special things, especially if you have a real event on the watershed. I mean, these are cops. These are real cops, you know, that you either stop or they shoot. So things will change as they demand things. And they've worked out, I guess it's been about 15 years.
I think they were brought on around 2004 or the shortly thereafter.
Yeah. Yeah. About the time I joined the board. Yeah. Yeah. And they've been, in my opinion, a great asset to the district. And I guess we've done the same thing recently. They're kind of sheriffs at the end of their career, or
no, not excuse me, not necessarily. The sheriff that we have now actually came from state parks. He's still got a career ahead of him. We tend to sometimes fill in with retirees, annuitants, to cover for him if he's on vacation. We've done that before, and they're great because most of those guys are really public oriented and they're great with people. So
yeah, Larry, we went out and met him. I think probably all four of us on the board, the new folks on the board. I just go meet the guy. He's a tremendous asset, and you're right, without a doubt, Larry. He has clear access to the sheriffs and super good guy. I think you'd appreciate it.
and how much do we need a second one?
well, I mean, it depends on what kind of coverage you want with a sheriff. Right now, like I said, we're on one side of the week, we're not on the other. So
3 days?
4 days. He's on a 4-10 plan. So Wednesday through Saturday for him.
Any other comments? Okay, with that, need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Great, thank you. Next up, item number 4, Biodiversity, Fire and Fuels Integrated Plan, updates and addendum to BIFIP Program Environmental Impact Report.
All right, good. Committee members. So the next item is the Biodiversity, Fires and Fuels Integrated Plan and a revision and CEQA addendum that we're going to present to you. So a little bit of background on the BIFIP itself. The BIFIP was adopted in October of 2019. The plan was adopted with the final environmental impact report that provides the findings of overriding considerations. And for us staff, believe it or not, we're entering our 5th year of implementation under this plan. And we've learned a lot of lessons as we've been doing this work. And so today we're making some revisions to this plan based on those lessons learned. And I'll remind the committee that in September of 2022, we brought forth our annual report, as we do each year, of the actions that we had completed under the BIFIP. And then we also outlined some work that we're going to do in the coming year. And so we've, in that report, outlined the wildland fire modeling that we were doing to evaluate the efficacy of our treatments. And we also identified an addendum as being a next step to help us do a number of things that we'll kind of review in this report. So the structure of the BIFIP, it is composed of a number of management actions that the district carries out on its watershed to reduce the potential for wildfire and enhance the habitat as well as the natural resources on the watershed, specifically our forest health, and to manage our invasive species that are there. So on the ground actions include fuel break construction and maintenance. It also includes weed detection and control, forest stand improvements, grassland and wet meadow and oakland restoration, as well as continued experimentation and innovation with weed control, as well as conducting inventories to inform our management work and conducting a slew of biological surveys that help inform how we move forward with this type of work. The methods that are incorporated into this plan are manual and mechanical methods, as well as grazing and prescribed burning. And then there's an adaptive management component. And this process today, this addendum, is really a part of that adaptive management. As I mentioned, we've learned as we've been doing this work and the components that we're bringing forward today to make slight operational adjustments to are from kind of the efficiency in the interest of improving the efficiencies and addressing some of the kind of to clarify a few points within it for our staff in terms of implementing this plan. So the components that we're going to talk about are combining our broom treatments. So right now, broom treatments are broken up into a number of components for broom management and fuel breaks, for new broom management in oak woodlands. And it's become kind of a mapping conundrum each year to go out and find enough of these acreage and all these different components. And so it really is, the goal is the same, we're just combining the action. The second one is going to be looking at increasing acreage for forestry restoration and forest health type work. And that's really to give us an opportunity to be more competitive with some of the grant opportunities that are out there. We've gotten to the point where we've come up to a limit within our CEQA compliance for what we can ask for grant funding to implement on the watershed. And we've done a lot of really good work that we'd like to see advanced and scaled. And this will give us an opportunity to do that. And then the other items are relating to our prescribed burn planning, and Carl will speak more to those as we go through these slides, and then making some minor adjustments and operational enhancements, revisions to our mitigation measures. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Carl Sanders, our Natural Resource Manager, to walk us through the management actions that we're refining.
Good afternoon. Again, Carl Sanders, Natural Resource Program Manager. Good afternoon, Carl Sanders, Natural Resources Program Manager. So again, what we have in front of you is our minor revisions or clarifications to our BIFIP, our plan, as well as a CEQA addendum that includes the analysis of those changes, minor changes to our plan. In front of you, you have on the screen, you have 4 different management actions that we're going to change. On the left are the existing management actions, and on the right, what we're proposing for our new actions. As Sean mentioned, combining the broom all into one management action will give us operational flexibility, specifically around ability to maintain the number of acres that we've already treated. We're also going to increase to maximum our year 5 allotment for broom. That takes us to 860 acres a year, and the ability to pick and choose whether we're doing new or, more, in my opinion, importantly, maintenance of those acres. That just gives us that language to do so going forward. The next 2 management actions are related to forestry and are definitely driven by our forest health focus over the last few years, and by the recent release of the forest health strategy through one TAM. And we're looking to make a moderate increase in the number of acres that we can treat, new acres within our forestry units, from 60 to 100 per year. And again, importantly, increasing our acreage allotment for maintenance from 100 to 300 acres per year. Again, that'll allow us, especially on the maintenance, to stay ahead of and on top of all of the work that we've conducted over the last 4 years, and looking forward into the next 5, where we're beginning our planning now. Mitigation measures. You'll notice we have actually all of these mitigation measures relate to prescribed fire in our attempt to put good fire on the ground. It's clarifying language. It's language that should allow us operational flexibility moving forward into the future, and less clear. The clarifying language would be less restrictive and or give us options going forward. For example, on the first one, mitigation measure Air 1, we had a very restrictive language about only that prescribed burns had to occur outside of 1,000 feet from residences, and we now have language in there that gives us the distance as specified within the smoke management plan, or as directed under the Bay Area Air Quality Management District guidelines. I think that's totally appropriate, and again, this language now aligns with those 2 plans. Second mitigation measure, protection of special status species or plants. Again, clarifying language that allows us to conduct burns in areas with rare plants where
actually the burn may have a benefit to those rare plants. The language that we had in there before, in my opinion, was overly restrictive and didn't allow us to, or the avoidance measures may have not allowed us to conduct burns where burn would be beneficial to rare plants. Another mitigation measure related to fire. This is just some language gave us some distance, exclusionary distance or avoidance distance and closure distance for public roads and trails, where that may not be necessary, and so we can now on a case-by-case basis make that decision. You know, and it may actually be beneficial for the public to be in safe close proximity to burns to make sure to see what we're doing and to learn from it. And finally, the SQL analysis or addendum prepared or penned by Panorama. Key takeaways from this was in the first 2 bullet points there, that you would need a subsequent or supplemental ER if and only if you had a significant new environmental impact from these changes and or there was a substantial increase in the severity of a previously identified effect. And neither of those are the case with the, again, clarifying and minor changes we've made to the language. And again, here the addendum is only prepared for minor technical changes. That's what we've made here. This is a review and refer item. Analysis of environmental parameters. The secret review determine if any changes fall within the existing analysis and impacts. And the addendum determination are the conclusions, again, by Panorama. No new or substantially more severe impacts from these revisions would occur, and no substantial changes would occur. The existing mitigation measures and determinations of significance for impacts included in the certified BIFIP programmatic ER would continue to be valid. So that is, an addendum is appropriate document per section 15164C, and no public review is necessarily needed. But this is a review and refer item.
Thank you, Carl. I'll just note that Panorama is with us in the room if you have any technical questions around the SQL compliance component of this. This really was an analysis of our 5 years of implementation of the BIFIP and direction and input that we've received from staff, from the biological side, from the botanical side, to understand how prescribed burning can be a benefit to our watershed. You know, we're working on a watershed that has a history of fire where there is fire adapt plant communities, and excluding fire from some of these areas is actually having a negative effect. And so this is a revision to help allow for our prescribed burn plans to be developed with a resource focused goal in them. And then our, thinking about the public and their involvement in terms of being on the watershed when we're doing a prescribed burn, trying to lift some of those restrictive languages in the BIFIP so that people can actually understand and see and experience this type of work and see it as positive activities when we do them. So that's the intention here with our revisions, and we think that the addendum process is the appropriate mechanism to allow us to make those changes and is in line with the adaptive management kind of process within the BIFIP. So with that, we'll take any questions.
Great, Carl. Yep.
Sorry, Chair Sampson, I did want to point out that we had an error on the agenda. It does identify this as an information item, while the staff report does identify it as a review and refer. I think there is a plan to bring this to a full board meeting. We'll just not take a recommendation or a referral from the board. I don't think it's necessary for us to move forward. I just wanted to make that note.
But we can still see us on a full board meeting.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Carl, Sean. Thank you very much. Board member comments. Larry.
Yeah. This may predate you, Sean. I can't quite remember. But, well, I also do remember, Carl, that there was an event with a prescribed burn, right, that got out of hand and caused pretty serious significances. Do you think those sensitivities were put in there to address that concern in the past?
Are you referring to the, I think it was a Pumpkin Ridge burn 20-some plus years ago?
A long time ago.
Yeah. These changes here actually don't affect the operations or the burn plan. So we have in place now burn plans, that are written with those concerns in mind, looking at the resources that you have on site, looking at the weather parameters, within which you would safely conduct a burn. These are more modifications, operational and planning modifications, for rare plants,
for where I place a burn on the landscape, so that I'm not absolutely excluded from placing it near a road or a trail or from within 1,000 feet of a community. So that's, the actual hazard of the incident is covered under the burn plan.
Let me ask you the question again. Why were the limitations put in the first round?
It didn't have to do with the district's previous history of a burning. It was probably just us as staff and consultants working together to develop language that was protective, but not necessarily informed by an incident. And now we're going back to the regulations that guide this to be kind of that informative information within our document.
Cool. Thanks.
Monty.
Two things. I mean, first of all, I just appreciate the fact that we're adaptively learning, that we're doing a lot, and a lot to be commended to maintain, to try to address our fire risk and protect our ecosystems. I love the fact we are learning while we're doing, and that we're taking the time to take that and modify what we do so that we can be more effective. It'd be very easy to kind of just be like, it's there, and be stuck with it and not change it. Managing fire on the landscape is something that has really has a ways to go in terms of us getting comfortable with it and learning how to do it well. And I appreciate that we're being leaders in doing that. So I just really want to commend you folks for the work and for coming back with these changes. I just want to ask the question, which I already think I know the answer to. It's my favorite. One of my favorite topics is I love that we're increasing the amount of work we're doing on broom. I'm going to just guess that this probably doesn't hold us steady in terms of the amount of acreage of new broom, total acreage on the landscape, or would this investment in additional acreage hold us steady in terms of the total volume of broom on our watershed, or are we still increasing acreage of broom in the watershed? Just a guess. I know that this is not a precise science.
Yeah, no. Well, we're trying to make it precise, or as best we can. We're doing it. We're going through another broom mapping exercise now. The 860 acres, just to clarify, is not all new broom.
Yeah.
And we have been doing 200 plus acres of new broom treatment each year now for the last 4 years. And in our bill, and we don't have to go back and maintain each of those areas each year. Usually it's a biannual basis before that plant goes back to seed, before it goes to seed or flowers and goes to seed. In my opinion, I think we'll be able to hold steady, with this 860 acre threshold. We may have to reevaluate that as we move forward and we continue to map and look at our progress. We still have on the map and within the BIFIP an area what we call deferred action that we currently are not addressing aggressively. We either don't have the tools or resources to do so. Maybe that's in play in the future. We'll see.
As I recall, that's like 60 to 80 acres a year, something like that, or the broom is advancing.
The rate of spread that may have changed given how much we've put. I don't have that data yet, but the rate of spread may have changed given how aggressively we've been mechanically treating it over the last 4 years. We've been focusing, that rate of spread has been, in my opinion, I don't have the data yet, but it's been contained by our focus on the perimeter and working our way in from the outside where the broom would have advanced.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Jed.
Yeah, Carl, thanks for that clarification. I know there was one public comment saying we're doing virtually nothing, and that's hardly the case. I know you can say that. I know Larry Minikes can as well. He gets out there and helps pull broom for us. And there was a great report about our efforts in getting rid of this terrible invasive species in the last watershed meeting that people can look at. And in addition, I think this is a great follow-on presentation there was one question about CEQA. And we're definitely moving forward with very thoughtful environmental impact work on this that not only impacts our ability to reduce fire risk, but it reduces the impact of these invasive species on our natural, endangered, and local native habitat. And Carl, just a shout out, thanks again for joining me in checking out the spotted owl habitat. What a joy it was to get out there with you. I felt lucky with the folks at Point Blue, and it's good to see you again. So my only one small question, I guess, for Sean would be, there was a report, I think, about a goal to have a state block grant proposal for with one TAM in the May to July time period, and any comment on where we are with that?
Sure. Fundraising for BIFIP is continuing through the One TAM Forest Health Strategy. We applied for 2 forest health grants, and that was in response to CAL FIRE coming back and noting that they were not prepared to do block grants regionally as they had anticipated and expected. And that was the funding that came for the Forest Health Strategy, which was, part of the BIFIP implementation, came from the Coastal Conservancy to help this region develop a plan that would be competitive for a block grant. The state came back to us and told us they were not prepared and didn't have the administrative tools in place yet to do that. However, they did then deny our 2 CAL FIRE grants, and we've gone out to the Wildlife Conservation Board and the Coastal Conservancy with those same proposals and are continuing discussions around funding for those through those programs and those opportunities.
And some hope that there's some legislation going through right now through the state that would open up the block grant process again. So more to follow on that. To follow up on Monty's point about being adaptive in this process, it's really good to see, especially as we hit a 5-year mark in what's going to be a perpetual plan, hopefully for, as long as we can think about it. I'm also really excited about the building block strategy to get us back to a place where we can put prescribed fire back on the ground, and to really look at the fact that right now it's really hard to put good fire in the watershed because there's too much vegetation. It's too dense, a very limited area, as well as taking what we know from all the studying that you guys continually do, whether it's plants or animals, and bringing that into the equation. So I think this is a very responsible way to move forward, and hopefully will set us up to be able to put more fire on the ground and get back to a level for what we're at. And to a place where the public understands that this is just a normal part of life. We gave a talk the other day, and there's the folks over at Cal are expecting or are stating that anywhere between 6 and 8 million acres of land burned naturally in the state of California annually. And to put in perspective, in our worst fire year in 2021, we barely touched 4 million with all those massive fires that got out of control. So we're way far behind the curve on this. So us doing our little part on our 22,000 acres, I think is a good way to show that we're responsibly managing our land. So I very much appreciate this and look forward to seeing it at a full board meeting. So thank you.
I was in Toronto yesterday. There are 430 fires burning in Ontario province, between Ontario and Quebec. It was unbelievable. I mean, you've seen the news. We went through Chicago to get there, and flying into Chicago looked like LA I grew up in LA, on 10 times worse than any day I ever saw in LA. It was worse than our worst here. The sky was orange. It looked like some kind of science fiction movie background. And it was just amazing. It rained in Toronto 3 days this week, so it cleared up in Toronto, but the rest of the area was just getting pounded by this. And their situation is that the climate change has increased thunderstorms, which are the primary source that they have for starting wildfires. So they have basically kind of just thrown their hands up and just let nature take its course, because they just can't, they don't have enough resources to fight it. They fight what they can fight, and the rest they just let go.
All right. Public comment.
Yes, there are 2. Miss Nona Dennis and Larry Minikis, please.
I want to comment on something, Carl. You kind of slipped over reference to the forest health strategy. And I'm not certain whether the board is keeping track of the forest health strategy. I'm certain you are, because this is Sean and Carl are, because this is a one TAM research project that's been going on now for about 3 years with substantial funding. Danny Franco from the park, from the one TAM, who works for the Conservancy, actually, gave a report to us. That is to say, I'm being Marine Conservation League. And he has reached the end of that. That study has come to a conclusion. I want to ask 2 questions. One, how closely, since MMWD is, of course, a partner in one TAM, have you been part of this whole process, working with Danny? And if his findings, the findings of that forest health strategy will alter in any way the approaches that you're taking. About also on the public side, the addendum for the use of the addendum for a CEQA addition, shall we say in loose terms, is the efficient way to go here. It gives me minor heartburn because the public is not allowed to respond, to comment. But I would urge you, about 10 years ago, we were taken on field trips up on Bolinas Ridge to see the work that was going on. 2 pilot projects were underway then on the so-called forest improvement. I've forgotten what it was called, the work that was being researched. And speaking of adaptive management, what has changed? We really like to know. It's important for the public. We have even, I'm not on the board now, on Marine Conservation League, but there are 2 experts in fire science and forestry on the board, actually. And there's a great interest in how the water district is actually treating the before and after of pilot projects. So I would urge you to keep up the public, what you say, exposure or transparency or just interest in these projects. I'm not certain whether you can comment on that at all, Carl, or not, whether you are continuing to have field trips. People are taking field trips to see other fire management techniques and approaches that are being used in the greater Ross Valley or Fuel Break and so forth. So is it possible? Could
Sean,
Carl just comment?
Sean, if you're comfortable.
Yeah,
Or-
we'll both comment. Thanks, Nona. The good news is this month, One Tam has the Tam van on the Watershed all month, and they're promoting the forest health work. And they've actually got a self-guided tour that takes you through the project sites around Lake Lagunitas that they've developed. And that was partially developed by the district's Grizzly Corps from UC Berkeley. That's an AmeriCorps participant working in our volunteer program, worked with One Tam to develop this outreach material that is directly linked to the forest health strategy to raise awareness around that document and what it's proposing for the county, and then also highlighting the work that the district has been kind of forward thinking on and implementing over the years. We're also continuing to work with One Tam to coordinate, community-led tours. Carl's going to be leading one, I believe, next week. And so there's a lot of opportunities for the community to continue to come and see these project sites. The resilient forest projects that were the pilots, you'll remember before the BIFIP that we did on Bolinas Fairfax Road, those are continuing to be researched. They're on a longer time frame now. So Cal Poly is doing 5-year monitoring on those. So we won't have updates for some period of time on those. I don't know. Do you want to add anything, Carl?
Sure. And Nona, to your question, yes, MMWD was intimately involved in the forest health plan from its start, 5 years ago, with other agency reps from the state park, national park, and then other even regional experts as well. And I would say the forest health strategy, as it progressed and as it's now near finalized, I think it influences. It certainly doesn't direct what we do.
It does not recommend actions, but it simply underscored. Well, it does have.
No, there
are recommendations.
Yeah, there are recommendations within it. They're not binding recommendations. It's a forest health regional strategy that gives all the different land agencies in the county a common language and structure with which to make decisions. For example, MWPA utilizes it quite a bit in their decision-making process.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Carl. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, okay,
Appreciate
thanks very much. And I no longer chair the Parks and Open Space Committee for MCL. It has changed a couple of years ago, but it is extremely useful to have regular reporting to that committee from Sean and Carl so that we are apprised of these various public events. Okay, I've gone.
Thank you.
Mr. Minikes, please.
You took all my time, Nona. I just want to emphasize a point that Carl made, that when you pull broom, and a lot of you know this, you got to go back and retreat it, because the next year you get a carpet of little green plants. So that as you go forward in these processes, you have more to pull, which means that the stuff that isn't getting touched is going to be more difficult to get to. if we don't have the resources to do that. So the point is as we're going through this process, we have to plan appropriately so that we can go into the areas that we had done previously 2 years later or 3 years later and go back and retreat them over and over again until we finally get to a point that we clear the stuff out in any particular area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, great. That brings us to our final item. Lagunitas Creek Fisheries Monitoring and Tagging Update. We're going to have Jonathan Kaler, our Natural Resource Manager in the Fisheries Department, provide this presentation. So we'll bring up a presentation for you here. Appreciate us ending on some really good news too. So thank you for.
Well, I hope I can deliver. All right, well, good afternoon, directors. Yeah, Jonathan Kaler, Fisheries Program Manager. Today, I'll just be providing a fairly brief update on our fisheries monitoring results this year, and also discussing some current tagging and tracking that we do with our fish and our plans for the future. So as you know, the district is required to monitor these 3 protected species in Lagunitas Creek per Water Board Order WR 9517. And of particular focus is the coho salmon there on the left, just because of its regional and statewide significance. You know, in Lagunitas Creek, it's one of the largest remaining wild populations of coho, and so we do really emphasize it in a lot of our monitoring. So the way we monitor fish in Lagunitas Creek is the standard kind of 3-prong approach that fish biologists all up and down the West Coast use, where we go out and count adult salmon in the fall and the winter. And then in the spring, we count what we call smolts. Those are the fish that are going to the ocean. And then in the summer, we count juveniles. And you can see our crews out at the various times of years. And historically, this really gives us the number of fish. But it's only in the last 20 or so years that technology has allowed us to kind of link those various life stages and really just provide a wealth of information in terms of how fish are surviving from one life stage to the next life stage, and really inform our management. So the way we do this is through a technology called pit tagging. And if you're familiar with microchips for pet cats and dogs, it's the same technology. It's the same thing you have if you have a fast track transponder and you drive across a bridge or on a toll road. And I actually brought some in for a little show and tell. You can pass those around and just check out what we're actually talking about. But a pit tag is, it stands for Passive Integrated Transponder Tag. And it's a very small little capsule of glass, and it's got no battery, which is the key, which means essentially it lasts forever, from our perspective anyway. And the other key word there is passive. It doesn't send out a signal until we ask it to. And so unlike radio tags, GPS tags that are constantly emitting their location and information, these tags essentially, we either have to find them again, or we have to set up a station like an antenna in a stream where they swim past, and then we can detect them again. So this is the general approach. You can see our watershed steward folks there who we rely heavily on. It's a great joint program between CCC and AmeriCorps that we use, and we tag many fish there. They are out there this spring tagging smolts. So the tag has a unique 12-digit code, and we can track individual fish through their life cycle. So as opposed to just looking at, the number of fish in any one year at these various life stages, we can actually track a fish from one year to the next. So here's the update. I presented these results, I think, late last year. It was a banner year for coho, record year in Lagunitas Creek watershed. You can see that on the graph on the left. The 2022 juvenile numbers were off the charts. And then through pit tagging, we can actually track some of those fish. We tagged about 800 of them to this year. And we just actually got done tracking or catching our smolts 2 weeks ago. And you can see it's another great year for coho. So I know a few of you have attended the Lagunitas TAC meetings, director, and they basically reported, Eric reported that we've seen more fish than we've ever historically seen. You can see the white bar there showing huge numbers in Olema Creek as well as Lagunitas Creek. So
Could you just say that one more time? Because it's a big deal, right?
it is a really big deal. Yeah. So this is not a trend we're used to seeing in Coho. Statewide and in other places, it's going in the opposite direction. So yeah, this is really encouraging to us that, you know, it's not surprising, I suppose, that we saw the record juvenile year and then that same group of fish providing the record smolt year. But it's definitely, yeah, it's a great thing.
Yeah, and reporting out in the WAC committee meeting in Sonoma, that they haven't seen this kind of response. So hard to tell why, but looking good.
Yeah, we'll take it. So those are fish we actually recapture again. And the usefulness of that is that we can actually measure them the first time and then measure them the second time. We can determine growth, we can determine survival, we can really determine a lot of things about their movements in the watershed. Has very practical applications for us because during processes like the TUCP last year, there were many questions about where the fish are at any given time. This is exactly the kind of data that helps us answer those questions. And you can see here, these are two of our antennas. We currently have three out there on the watershed. The left one is on the San Geronimo, right at our pump station. And then this lower one, or the second one on the right, is in lower Lagunitas Creek. And that's actually more of the setup we would like to expand. So we're looking to increase the number of antennas throughout the watershed. Because if you put two antennas in short sequence, you can actually determine the direction that the fish is swimming. So if it hits antenna 1 and then 2, you know it's swimming upstream or downstream. And so it gives us a little more information. These antennas are fairly expensive. They're in the $15,000 to $25,000 range. It's you know, it's a fairly sophisticated, specialized piece of equipment. And we keep all of the data safe up on the stream bank, but we still are in a stream environment, so they're prone to damage, and so we need to keep them safe. So here's a map of our current three shown in the yellow dots. This is the three antennas we currently have. We're looking to expand this through grant funding, through internal funding. We've actually put pit tag antenna requests in some of our grants and been successful. So we have a DWR grant that will help fund some of our pit tagging in our restoration reach. There you can see dots 4 and 5. That's where we've been talking about all of the Lagunitas Creek restoration work that's planned. And then the other ones are just really to fill in some gaps in the watershed. I will point out that site 8, that is in Olema Creek. The National Park Service actually has its own antenna. They use slightly different technology. So it's kind of like AM and FM radios. It's the same thing, but it's not. And so our fish go over there, their fish might come over here. We really want to bring them up to the same technology and collaborate there. So we're exploring ways to help bridge that gap. And that's where we're at now.
So the benefit of us having pit tag antennas in the watershed is helping us have better data for understanding long-term trends within the Lagunitas Creek watershed. And we really see an opportunity now to expand this technology as others on the West Coast have done. So Sonoma County Water Agency has a very large pit tag antenna program. And our fisheries department would benefit from enhancing this and also having like backup antennas, because there have been years where damage happens and then we have to take it out and then we lose this period of time where we could be collecting good data. So that's the intention here, to provide the update that we're exploring opportunities to expand this, and we'll be doing this over the next couple of years. Our first expansion will happen within the Lagunitas Creek Restoration Reach, where we have a grant from DWR to buy more equipment, install that equipment, conduct more monitoring, and then that grant specifically from DWR is going to fund some gravel augmentation that we're doing in Lagunitas Creek, which we have not done as a restoration technique, and it's pretty exciting stuff. So I'll just conclude on the next watershed committee meeting. We'll kind of align with the summary of our monitoring data. So we'll be bringing a report on that, and then we'll be bringing a report on our restoration projects after that, as we're gearing up for an implementation summer in 2024.
Great. Thank you both very much for the presentation, and we'll go to board comments. Monty, you want to lead us off on this one?
I can't underscore enough how important it is that the numbers that we're seeing in Lagunitas Creek. I mean, as you guys indicated, these are not the kind of trends that we're seeing up and down the coast. So the few bright spots that we have where we actually see populations trending in the opposite direction is really standout. And the district is really recognized as a leader in our fisheries restoration work in the fisheries restoration community. So that is kudos to the district and to you guys for leading that effort and the recognition that we get from that. I really appreciate the pit tag arrays that are going in. Two questions is I'm glad to hear that we're putting in the arrays in places where we're going to be doing restoration, so we can start seeing if there is an increase in use. That kind of information isn't just valuable for us in terms of our future management actions. It's really important data just in the fisheries community because there's a lot of unknowns there. So the fact that we're contributing back to the fisheries community is, again, sort of another one of these ways in which our district is doing something that benefits people above and beyond outside of our district. Are we putting in arrays elsewhere in like Walker Creek to see whether we're seeing our fish, if we want to call them our fish, in Lagunitas Creek moving into other areas? I mean, and I know I'm offering a leading question, which is the benefit of which when we restore fisheries here, are we helping to seed other populations to other streams elsewhere along the coast?
Yeah, it's a great question. The microphone's still on. Yeah. We don't have current plans to put antennas in Walker. California Trout and the Department of Fish and Wildlife run 3 antennas in that system. So theoretically, if our tags go up that stream, we would detect them. We do share tag numbers. Occasionally we'll detect fish that we did not tag. That actually happens quite often. So we'll send them around kind of the usual suspects. So yeah, that's where we are currently, but it's very possible in the future that we might look to Walker.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Larry.
What's the smallest fish you can tag?
70 millimeters. That's where we cut it off. So talking about with the tag that I passed around, that's a 12 millimeter tag. They make a 9 millimeter tag. You can actually go smaller, but we feel 70 is about the smallest.
And do you tag anything larger than 70?
Yeah, we tag. So we also tag steelhead, and those are 7-8 inches, much larger. Coho don't get much larger than about 140 or so, 140 millimeters, 4.5 inches or so before they go to the ocean. So yeah, but we use the same size tag basically in all these fish. One thing about the tag is it only has a read range of about 1.5 feet. So if we could use bigger tags, we get a larger read range. So it's a trade-off.
Thanks.
Okay, Jed.
Yeah, I think we had a target for about a year from now, April 2024, to have final restoration designs for Lagunitas Creek enhancements and construction bidding for May next year and implementation, in the summer and fall. We're still on target for that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be at 65% by the end of the month, and then we'll be submitting our permits to the agencies to help with implementation, and that should give us about 9 months to get those permits before we need to develop our bid package and then be ready to implement a subset of our phase 1 sites in 2024. And we have funding from DWR for sites 11 and 12, which are a gravel augmentation for an amount of about $600,000. And then we have a grant from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for $1.4 million for sites 1, 2, 3. And then we're seeking funding for 4, 5, and 6, and that's the phase 1 complex of sites. And depending on how much kind of funding we have come the summer of 2024, will kind of dictate which ones we implement. And then also we have to be considerate that this is all happening mostly on state parks land. And so we will have an impact on the Cross Marin Trail. And we're being very sensitive to how much work they want to see in any one summer to not disrupt their activities.
That's awesome. I just think it's great to set goals. I'm glad that they were put out there for us to help work with you and follow. Obviously, some things slip, but it's also good to just keep reporting on it. Like, are we moving along? Are we on target? Are we ahead of target? And then we can see how we can be as supportive as possible, Sean, as you go forward. So thank you for the presentation.
Great. I don't have anything to add what's already been said to this point, but again, thank you very much. And it's always good to tell our story loud as we can when something good happens like this. So explaining about how healthy the population is, especially of the coho salmon, would be great. I don't know if could work with potentially the communications department or somehow put something up, but it'd be really great to see if something else is not already. Public comment.
Yes, we have Miss Barbara Salzman.
Hi, I just wanted to express my appreciation also to the district for maintaining this committee and in such good standing. I mean, you are required to, I mean, I've been on it since the beginning. You're required to, but you really devote a lot of resources to it, and probably it doesn't need to be that many to meet your requirements. So it really is appreciated, and as I think you recognize, it's great that the fish are expanding, but the information is contributing regionally and statewide to the understanding of this fish population. So thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.